Hey guys, a couple years ago I was listening to a podcast, and the host of the podcast had a Jewish rabbi on, and the discussion they were having was their favorite Hebrew words and their origin. And I think they listed off 5 or 10 of them. But the third one really caught my attention. It was the word Mitzrayim, and it's the word that the Jewish people use for the nation of Egypt. And what it comes from is the word Metzra, which means constriction or narrow. And it kind of set my mind reeling when I heard that. See, it makes sense that they called it the narrow place, because if you look through the book of Exodus, they were enslaved there for 400 years. But I started thinking, that's not how it started. That's not where it began. It didn't start as the narrow place. If you go to the previous book, the book of Genesis, and you go towards the end of the book, you have the story of Joseph. He was the second to the youngest son of 12 brothers. His brothers hate him because he had these prolific dreams and he was his father's favorite, so they sell him into slavery. He ends up working for a guy, he ends up in prison, and then he ends up being the ruler of Egypt. At this time, there was a famine, so his brothers come from their land to Egypt to buy food, and they meet their brother, and it's an incredible exchange. But at the end of this exchange, Joseph, the leader of Egypt, invites his whole family, the nation of Israel, to move to Egypt so he could take care of them. There was food there, there was provision there. It didn't start as the narrow place. It started as the answer to their prayers. It started as salvation. It meant that they were going to survive. It was everything they needed. It was everything they wanted. But they stayed too long. They stayed in that one spot because it provided for them in that one time and place. And they became enslaved there. And they were enslaved there for 400 years. In the book of Exodus, God then comes to Moses in the burning bush and says, I've heard the cries of my people in Egypt, the narrow place, and I want to take them to a wide open, spacious land flowing with milk and honey. God never intends for us to stay in one place. We might be asking God for something, be like, God, if I only had this job, if I only had this relationship, if I only had this understanding. And we think it's the answer to our prayers. And maybe it is. Maybe it's exactly what we need at that time. But if we stay in that one spot too long, it begins to constrict us because we were always meant to grow. We were always meant to move forward. We were always meant to increase. And that's not easy. It takes a lot of bravery. It takes a lot of courage to move out of what's easy, what we know, and move into something that's unknown. But that's what we have to do. If you read on in the story of Exodus, they're a couple days out from Egypt. They've been rescued. They've been set free. And they start complaining and say, why don't we just go back to Egypt? At least we had pots of meat there. Yeah, we were abused. Yeah, we were mistreated. Yeah, we were in slavery. But at least we had this. It seems insane, but we do the same thing. We would rather stay in a place that's no longer working, that no longer fits, a place that's limiting our growth because we know it. We know the rules. We understand it. Taking a step out in faith is not easy. But if we want to experience more freedom, if we want to experience more growth, if we want to experience something better than what we're currently experiencing, we have to take that step out. Another time, I was listening to a Jewish rabbi. Apparently, I listen to a lot of Jewish rabbis. And he said, I'm going to use the example of the lobster, like you do. He says a lobster has the exoskeleton shell, like we all know it to have. And it's born with an exoskeleton shell. But a lobster continues to grow. But the shell does not grow. And when the lobster grows, the shell itself becomes painful and constricting. It limits its growth. So what it needs to do is go underneath a covering and shed that shell. It's a vulnerable process. It's a dangerous process. But as it sheds that shell, it allows for a new shell to grow up around it, to protect it, to keep it safe as it continues to grow. And we need to do the same thing. as we feel the situation we're in, the circumstances we're in, the ideas we have begin to become restricting and limit our growth. We need to go under a covering. We need to come under the relationships of other people. We need to go to God and shed that shell. We need to shed those ideas. We need to be able to walk away from that job. We need to be able to step foot out to try something new, to do something new, so we can experience more freedom, more hope, more growth. And then a new shell will wrap around us to keep us safe, because we were never meant to stay in one place for too long. We were always meant to keep moving forward and growing. We were always meant to leave the narrow place.